Father's Day is about celebrating fathers. So I want to share with you a little bit now about my dad. My dad has served as a role model for me in so many ways. First and foremost, he is a living example of what it means to live a life of service to others. My dad is a high school history teacher, and he has very intentionally chosen to teach in the inner city of Springfield, Massachusetts, for the past 40 years. He didn't stop there, though. He's also served as the president of the board of trustees for our library in my hometown of Northampton for the past 27 years, during which time he's overseen a complete renovation of the building, inside and out. He also managed to find time between all this and having kids, raising a family, to serve as the campaign manager for the first female mayor of Northampton. My dad is the epitome of what it means to be a public servant. Public service alone does not a great father make, though. Unfortunately, my dad did a lot of other amazing things as well. He taught me to think with an open and critical mind, starting at a very young age, when he and my mom first brought me to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Northampton and Florence. He was also always there for me, especially during the hard times. As about one example, when I was about 3 years old, I fell down a half flight of stairs, and I got a big gash on my forehead. Still got a little scar up here, and I needed stitches. And it's one of my earliest memories, being in the hospital, lying flat on my back on a gurney with someone holding my head so that I wouldn't move, because I was a little kid and squirming. And there was bright lights in my face, and I was scared. I asked over and over again, "Dad, are you there? Dad, are you there?" And he was there. He, in fact, was standing at the foot of the gurney, holding my ankles, and every time I asked, he would give my ankles a squeeze and say, "I'm right here, Seth. I'm right here. It's just going to be another 2 minutes." Well, we were certainly not a perfect family, since there's no such thing. Overall, my memories of my life with my family are overwhelmingly positive, at least until the age of 13. When I was 13, things took a turn for the worse. I have a very intense memory of all of us, me, Dad, my mom, and my sister Julia, sitting in our living room, and my parents telling us that they were thinking about getting a divorce. I don't remember much about the words that were said. All I can think of is, when I think of this, is my mom sitting there crying, and my dad looking miserable, so unhappy. There were a lot of reasons why my mom and dad got divorced. There's usually not just one reason that a relationship doesn't work. But sometimes there are things that are just non-negotiable. And it wasn't that my dad had an affair with a younger woman. It wasn't that my mom and dad just didn't love each other anymore. One of the big difficulties they faced, that really wasn't any way to overcome, is that my dad is gay. And so while my story of having a gay dad starts when I was a teenager, my dad's story of being a gay man and a decidedly unfriendly to gay people culture starts much earlier. His story starts when he was a little kid. His given name is Russell, and so as a kid he was Russ, or Rusty for short. And he remembers very clearly how when he would do certain things, his mother would say to him, "Well, Ruthie, why'd you do that?" At the time, he didn't even really understand what was going on. He just knew that it didn't feel good and that he was doing something wrong. It wasn't until he was looking back as an adult that he realized that she would only say that when he was doing things or saying things that we would culturally define as more on the feminine side of things. His older brother and his dad were a little less subtle in their pressure. Their form of reparative therapy for my dad happened when he would come home to announcements from his father like, "Well, son, you're signed up to play Little League baseball, and your brother's going to be the coach, so you're definitely going to make the team." He wasn't good at sports, and so pretty quickly all the local kids were making fun of him for his lack of ability. My dad shared that being gay in the 1950s was, quote, "like poison. At the time, it was better to have cancer than to be gay." And unsurprisingly, given those cultural conditions, as he grew into a teenager and then a young adult, my dad lived the life of a straight person. He dated girls in high school and college, and despite having some gay experiences with men, as he describes it, he compartmentalized. He set aside those gay experiences as something totally different and separate from himself. And so he entered into marriage with my mother with the full integrity of a straight person. Unfortunately, this is a fairly typical experience for a gay person growing up in the 50s and 60s. My dad's experience is not unique. So, this brings us back to the major change that was happening in what had been the perfect American family. We had a mom, we had a dad, we had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, both fairly bright and intelligent and friendly. The only thing we were missing was a dog. We had 2 cats instead. And everything was perfectly normal, on the surface at least, until that fateful day when life changed forever. The divorce process wasn't clean and simple. My dad's understanding of his sexuality was evolving. He wasn't in that first conversation in a place where he was just gay and that was it. So he and my mom tried to make it work. They tried to stay together for the kids, and it took them years to finally decide that, yes, we need to get divorced. As hard as those times were, my mom and dad getting divorced was definitely the right thing for our family. And while my mom remained single, my dad wasted little time before entering into a long-term committed relationship with my other dad, Bob Dunn. Bob brought with him to our new blended family his daughter, Crystal. And the story of how Crystal became his daughter is one example of just how amazing a person Bob was. Bob, clearly self-identified and living as a gay man back in 1982 when Crystal was born, was working at a rehab clinic for people with drug addictions. And one of the clinic's clients, a young African-American woman, had a baby while she was in rehab and was giving it up for adoption. And Bob, he just knew that this child needed a home and that that home was going to be with him. Unfortunately, as a single gay man in 1982, he wasn't going to be able to adopt Crystal. So he got creative and he went around and talked to all his coworkers, and he found a straight woman who would agree to marry him so they could adopt Crystal. So they did. They got married, they adopted Crystal, but unsurprisingly, the marriage ended up falling apart. But Bob got what he wanted. He got full custody of Crystal. He got his daughter. And man, he did everything for her. As a single parent without a college degree, he would work 80-hour weeks, 2 full-time jobs, doing whatever he had to do to make sure that Crystal had what she needed. He loved her to death. And he did everything he could at a sacrifice, great sacrifice, to himself. So I came to know this story and many other things about Bob and Crystal in the 10 years after the divorce. And those 10 years were a study in contrasts. My mom, on the one hand, struggled to move past the split with my dad and had to work incredibly hard to build a new life for herself as a single person. And she did it. My dad's, on the other hand, where I had chosen to live, we were in the process of creating a blended family with 3 teenagers, which was something to behold. We did it, though. We all pulled together, and when it became a viable legal option, my dad and Bob got married. Now, I could tell you endless stories of the pranks that were pulled, of the fights that we had, of all the bonding that pulled us together into a tight-knit family. But the story I'm going to tell you, though, is one of the most meaningful ones, most meaningful parts to me. That's unfortunately the tragic ending. Because see, Bob, despite all the protests from my dad and from me and from my sisters, Bob smoked. Pack and a half a day for 20 years. So when he had to have emergency surgery 5 years ago to remove a brain tumor that was causing him to lose his balance, we were all terrified that there might be cancer somewhere else. And while he came through the surgery successfully, as it turned out, we were justified in our fears. 2 weeks later, after he had his PET scan, we found out that Bob had stage 4 cancer, the worst kind, all the way up and down his esophagus. For anyone who has dealt with cancer, you know the ensuing 1.5 years of radiation and chemotherapy was agonizing. The amazing thing, looking back though, was the intense commitment and bond of love that my dad and Bob shared. My dad, bless his soul, had rarely used his sick days and had managed to accumulate, over the 35 years he had served at that point, 432 sick days. We were very blessed, actually, because he was able to get a doctor's note, and he spent every day of the last 1.5 years of Bob's life with him. So roles were getting reversed all over the place. Bob was a terrific cook. He had been the cook for our blended family. My dad took over, and he did an admirable job filling in. Bob also loved animals. He had bred Great Danes, and he was breeding French Bulldogs at the time. He also had a pigeon coop out in the backyard, his racing pigeons, that needed to get fed every day. And my dad, the super clean, bordering on OCD member of our family, he went out to that pigeon coop every day and fed those pigeons for months. And when Bob was close to dying and spending most of his time in the hospital, my dad slept there at the hospital for days on end, coming home only to get a new suitcase of clothes and take an occasional shower. The day Bob died, my dad lost his husband, his best friend, and the love of his life. And me and my sisters, we lost our dad. And he was such a good dad to us. And once his family unit expanded beyond just him and Crystal to include me and Julia, we were an equal part of the family. Just like he did everything he could to help Crystal, he did everything he could to help us too. There was one point in my early young adulthood, I was out on my own and I made a whole series of bad decisions about credit cards. And not only did I have a lot of debt, I wasn't paying my bills. But I finally started to take some responsibility and was making minimum payments. And when Bob saw that I was taking responsibility and moving forward, he wrote a check that wiped out all of that debt. Now, the amazing thing about Bob was that he didn't just do this for his immediate family. Even back when he and Crystal were scraping by, he would always be there for friends in need, even when it meant that he had to go without. He was a generous and giving soul. And of course, that wasn't just financially. Bob had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. He loved me and my sisters and my dad no matter what. No matter how big a mistake we made, no matter whether we were apologetic or not. He always loved us. He always forgave. He always forgave gracefully. And he supported us no matter what. He was a special guy. So my dad and Bob, two gay parents. You might be curious if there was any difference between living with straight parents and living with gay parents. And the short answer is no, not really. But there were some cosmetic differences, to be sure. For example, leaving the toilet seats down or up was much less of an issue when there was two dads. And there were definitely a few more risque jokes in my dad's household that my mom would not have approved of. And of course, we had Logo on cable, the gay channel. But really, things were more the same than they were different. My dad was still the one that cleaned, regardless of whether he was married to a man or a woman. I still had to do chores, regardless of whether it was mom or dad cracking the whip, or dad and dad cracking the whip. And most importantly, in all of the ways that mattered most, I still had two loving parents who were there for me. And in fact, I have it even better, because I had 3 loving parents, because I was able to keep my mom around too. And I'll tell you something else about gay parents. It seems a little ridiculous to me that I need to say this. But there's all this chatter in some parts of the media and in some places in our culture about how living with gay parents harms their kids and turns them gay. Well, guess what? Living with two parents did not make me gay. Didn't make me gay, didn't make my sister Julia gay, didn't make my sister Crystal gay. In fact, we're probably some of the straightest people you'll come across. What living with two gay men of integrity, men of compassion, men of commitment, men who loved me and cared for me, what that did do was teach me how to be a good person, and hopefully someday to be a good father. So what do I mean by being a good father? That song we sang earlier, when our heart is in a holy place, that's what I want to talk about. The kinds of fathers that I hope we can be when our hearts are in a holy place. When our hearts are in a holy place, I hope that we aspire to be fathers that love our children unconditionally, who love them for who they are, forgiving their mistakes, and embracing them with love and joy just for being. I hope we aspire to be fathers who are equal parents in our child's lives, taking just as much responsibility as our partner for their parenting. When our hearts are in a holy place, I hope we aspire to be fathers who defy the cultural gender norms of being masculine. We talk with our children about our feelings, we cry with them, and we do arts and crafts projects with them. I hope we be fathers who aspire to live and practice our values, since our children learn far more from our actions than they do from our words. When our hearts are in a holy place, I hope we aspire to be fathers who slow down and take time to appreciate the little things in life, so that our children learn to do the same. I hope we aspire to be fathers who listen, since children always have so much to teach us. And when our hearts are in a holy place, I hope we aspire to be fathers who take responsibility for our feelings and for our emotions, who do the spiritual work of healing, so that we can help our children avoid falling into spiritual traps of blame and shame. At the very least, that's the kind of father I aspire to be. And I aspire to be this kind of father because of my two dads. They showed me what it means to be a great father. They taught me to love. They taught me to give freely of my time and of my possessions. They taught me to give back to my community. And they taught me to care for others. I also know that I experienced this loving family with little harassment from the outside because of where we lived and because of the religious community of which we were a part. I actually interviewed my dad in preparing to write this sermon, and one of the things he shared with me was that he felt lucky, and he thought he and Bob were lucky, to live in a place similar to Obama, a place that evolved and turned into one of the best places to live and be gay. Oklahoma, unfortunately, still has a lot of evolving to do. I spoke this past fall with a new member here at All Souls who was so thankful to have found our church community because the faith tradition she grew up in had taught her that as a gay person, she was bad and wrong and sinful and an abomination just for being who she was. Now, my dads, they managed to hang in there pretty well overall, but they experienced a lot of pain in their own lives as well because of their sexual orientation. And that pain, it got passed down. My family, my mom and dad's divorce was incredibly difficult for me and my sister, even though it was the right thing to do. And it was and continues to be painful for my mom. I can guarantee you that she didn't dream as a little girl of getting divorced when she was in her 40s and living single in her 50s and 60s. Now, when I was interviewing my dad, I asked him if there was anything he thought people should know as I was writing this sermon. And he shared about pain as well. So what he wanted you all to know was, people should know how important it is to be supportive of a minority in a majority culture. It's harder for people in the minority to navigate life than people who are in the majority. I'll say that again. People should know how important it is to be supportive of a minority in a majority culture. It's harder for people in the minority to navigate life than the people in the majority realize. It's because of all these kinds of pain, the pain that oppression and discrimination and hate causes to people and to families, that it is so crucial for us as a church and as a community and as a country to be welcoming to LGBT people. That's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Because this pain lingers and hurts for decades, lifetimes, and beyond, we need to not only be welcoming to LGBT people, we need to be shouting our support from the rooftops and then following up with that support with action that makes a difference in the world. Now, our group here at All Souls is called LGBT and Allies. And it's the allies part for the majority of us folks in this church who are straight that we need to focus on. Allies walk in the Pride Parade, like a group of us from All Souls did last week. Allies give rousing sermons defending gay marriage, like our senior minister, Reverend Marlon Lavenhar, did just about a month ago. Allies found chapters of PFLAG, which stands for Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, which is what All Souls member Nancy McDonald did right here in Tulsa when her daughter came out. Allies spread the word in the community about their religious values so that people in need know that there are alternatives to religions that tell them they are bad and wrong because of who they're attracted to. Allies do the social justice work so that someday we'll be able to say to our children that no gay kid or teenager is bullied because of their sexual orientation. Now, words and statements are important first steps. But if we don't follow up our words with concrete action, we will have failed to make the changes we need to make to put an end to the hurt and pain. And the thing is, oppression, discrimination, hate, it doesn't just hit its target. It hits everywhere in the general direction of where it's directed. So it hits gay people, it hits straight people, it hits children, it hits families. It hurts everyone. I grew up with two dads. Two dads who are amazing parents, two dads who are amazing people. People just like you, people just like me. In so many ways, they lived their values. They lived what it means to be a good father. They not only loved me and my sisters unconditionally, they lived and modeled their values every day. And while we and they were lucky to be living in a place that has evolved to be gay-friendly, we are not yet gay-friendly as a city, as a state, or as a country. And until that day arrives, all of us, gay folk and straight allies alike, we must heed the call of justice. Today is Father's Day. And my two dads, they taught me to hear and heed that call. It's a call to love. My dads taught me to love everyone, regardless of their race, gender, age, or sexual orientation. Now that is something worthy of a day of celebration. Amen.